Who is undoubtedly the most dangerous person you know? Story 1. My mom has totaled around 5 cars. She's a terrible driver, shouldn't even be on the road. If she's driving, I'll say, I'll take my car and meet you there. Came here to say the exact same thing, but my fiel. We were casually chatting about Top Gear in the episode with the Toyota that was indestructible. So he chirps in and says, they said that about the Land Rover, they were wrong. So I asked what happened to it. The gearbox broke catastrophically. Then my wife finished the story. Because you drove it into a wall at 50 miles per hour in a 30 zone. We had a good laugh, but man, he really was a shit driver. Saying this because I see a lot of similar responses. The man was well into his 80s when he passed away. He drove from 1945 to the early 2010s. Insurance was very different in his early days. So stop wondering what he paid or why they didn't cut him off. Did he pay a lot in his later life? No doubt. Did he share that with me? Absolutely not. Story 2. My dad eats mushrooms from his backyard and hoses out his toaster and hangs it by the cord on the washing line to dry. These events are probably connected. Story 3. My brother-in-law. He's a chronic alcoholic with a narcissistic personality and violent tendencies. He has assaulted each of his siblings and assaulted his ex-wife and little sister. He's been enabled and taught to be a victim his whole life. I'm terrified of him, but he's someone you never want to show fear or weakness. Sounds like my ex. Has DUIs and charges for assaulting a police officer. Was violent with me and my child. When I hear about a DV murder anywhere near me, I will stop to watch the news to see if it's him killing his current girlfriend. He'd do it too if he thought he could get away with that little bit more. Story 4. A nurse I have worked with once. She completely stepped over boundaries, disconnected a PIC line without informing me, the PIC-trained nurse. Didn't wear gloves or wash her hands, couldn't take criticism or couldn't be taught about the error of her clinical judgment. Instead, I shouted at myself, the patient, and other staff. Didn't come back, so she's probably moved on to another area. The patient, that was her last go at palliative chemo to give her some more months of quality time with her children. The PIC blocked. They didn't give her another one. That nurse contributed to that woman having less time with her family. I will never forgive her. And you reported her, right? Oh, absolutely. She was banned from working in my department, and an official complaint was made to her employer. She was an agency nurse. I wrote everything down and handed it all to my superiors for any further action. It wasn't even the PIC error. That's awful, and it cost the woman her quality time with her family. But it was that, an error. We've all made them. We're all fallible, and we all make mistakes. She shouldn't have touched it. She wasn't trained. If she had touched it and then told me immediately, I could have maybe rectified it. She didn't. No, what's worse is that instead of learning and developing her knowledge, she turned defensive. She refused to learn from her error and instead decided to turn the blame on my department. She was an experienced nurse of over 10 years. She should have known to not touch these things unless you're trained. But she just won't learn. She won't reflect or develop, and my huge fear is that if she just joins another agency or goes to oncology or hematology, that she could end up causing someone's PIC to block whilst they're getting curative treatment. She could quite easily cause someone to die, and that's not because of one error one time. It's because she will always believe that she is right and can do what she wants. It's because she doesn't believe she is fallible, and she won't learn. Story 5. My granddad when he was alive. He was a sweet, humble old man who loved gardening, but oh my God, I do not know who allowed him to keep driving. He was 84 with arthritis. Plus, he was deaf and almost blind, but he insisted on still driving. One time he parked his car on a tram track with my sister inside it. He is the sole reason I think there should be an age limit on driving licenses. That reminds me of my grandparents' former neighbor. She was in her 90s at the time, and really shouldn't have been driving anymore. One time she was backing out of her driveway and almost ran over my grandma, who was leading a horse back to the stables. If you can't see an entire frigging horse and can't hear the person next to the horse screaming, you really shouldn't be driving. Everyone was fine. Grandma got the horse and herself out of the way in time, and luckily the horse didn't panic. Story 6. Babies in that stage of crawling and almost walking. Those nutcases try to eat electricity. Story 7. Either the guy who got busted diddling preschoolers, or the guy who tried to kidnap a high school girl at gunpoint because she called him creepy while he was high on something. Story 8. My parents moved into a neighborhood with a truck driver as a neighbor. When they finally met him, he drove all the time, they found out his wife had killed herself, and his son had been in jail prison on and off since he was a minor. Trucker dude was super rough around the edges, but had acquired quite a bit of wealth over his career of hard work. My parents started having him over for dinners and became pretty good friends. He didn't like to talk about his son and got really grumpy when his name came up. Dad wasn't the direct problem. His son got released from prison and came back home on a last chance deal with his dad. He was in rehab, he was helpful, and helped my parents with projects and chores. They started trusting the guy. He seemed like things were going well in his life for once. I even met the up and agreed he was a nice kid with a bad life. He was older than me, and I still say kid LL. Welp. Dad called my parents and told them he had been missing for 2 nights, and that's not a good sign. Turns out he went on a bender, beat the living shit of his girlfriend in a Home Depot parking lot, and evaded a cop on his way out. He started calling my parents with burner phones, asking if he could come over. The answer was a hard no. He then escalated to roll up with his crew and take their shit while they slept. That escalated things even more. He got caught the next day at a trap house and arrested with an illegal handgun. Was locked in for 7 years and released on good behavior. Nobody knows where he is. His dad died a few years back. They think they saw him multiple times sitting outside of his old house late at night. That's the scariest person I know. My parents did nothing but feed him and offer advice when he needed it. Just a nice old couple. Unpredictable people that flip on a switch scare me. Story 9, my BIL's best friend who works for the government. He's not allowed to tell us what he does, and all we know he leaves for a couple of weeks at a time every few months. Speaks several languages, and looks like he's cut out of wood. There was one time where he came over to a party I was having, and I'd set up some VR games for people to try. There was a game where zombies attack you from all sides, and it's all about keeping your head on a swivel and headshots. I don't remember the specifics, but none of us had gotten past level 2 or 3. He made it to something like 30 without breaking a sweat. It was his first time playing that game, and he hasn't played since SNES days. Everyone that saw him play his move that day agrees he's probably not working in IT. I've never asked him what he does, I just heard he can't talk about it, so I don't bring it up. I'm not saying he's Jason Bourne. All I know is that he was in the Army, and I think I remember someone mentioning he went to Ranger School. His job sends him all over the world. In the time that I've known him, about 5 years, he's lived in the UK, Philippines, and Africa. This one is from a completely personal point of view, but he definitely has a I'm not gonna fuck with that guy vibe. He's a super nice guy that's never shown an ounce of aggression. But I think if you asked him during dinner how many people are in the booth 3 tables over, he'd be able to tell you without looking. Story 10. My father, a wife-beating criminal, addict full of steroids and anger issues. He showed up at my little sister's house last January and threatened her for money. But the dangerous part is that he's scary smart. Gotta give credit where credit is due. That guy is not stupid, and that's what makes him all the more dangerous. There's very few people I'm genuinely afraid of, but he's one of them. Story 11. Another one for the father bandwagon here. Physically big guy who was a former drug dealer and hard man known to be called to have nice conversations with people. Read, get money out of people who owed it to more important people. With his position of employment and stature as a tough guy came a reputation that was defended at all times and all costs. He's seen some things. I've seen some things being around him when I was younger. He got out of the life when he was politely asked by a group of 20 dudes in broad daylight in the middle of town to stop what he was doing or else. He took that advice and hasn't looked back. He did some odd muscle work after that, but nothing serious. He's the nicest guy and has always been nice/fair to me personally, but he still has that mindset deep down which comes up every now and again. Story 12. My grandfather, wonderful, kind, and caring man, won a military cross for exceptional bravery for taking out 2 machine gun nests in World War II. He ran out of ammo and killed multiple enemies with a shovel by hand. Was quiet, not boastful, but towards the end of his life talked about how easy it became to kill in the war. And he remembered the sound of an enemy's head coming off when he hit him with a shovel. Made me think how quiet and unassuming he was, but when necessary, he was able to do that. Story 13. My neighbor Frank is from Sicily. He smokes in the supermarket, drives like a nutcase, and can swear in 3 languages. He's 80 years old, and he was drinking limoncello on his roof this morning. One of my favorite people, Story 14, I used to work for different pot farms out in Northern California. I got a job working for some guys another friend was working for. They were brothers. I worked for one brother, mostly on his farm. He pretended to be a peace and love hippie guy who went to music festivals and stuff. The other brother, it turns out, was a kind of mob boss for the Bulgarian mob. I thought they were just pot growers, which was semi-legal at the time. It turns out they had their hands in all sorts of things, including sex trafficking. I had to nope the fuck out of that situation when I found out what was really going on. It was wild too because everyone I met came off as pretty nice. I never suspected them of being full of gangsters. They didn't want to pay me when I quit, and I almost got mauled by their massive pit mastiff dog. I was pretty naive and highly stoned back then. Story 15. My grandma, she got me drunk at 2. Tried to groom me. Tried to sell my mom for money as a raging alcoholic. Last year she was taking meds for her liver. You weren't allowed to drink alcohol on the meds. She did anyway, and her tongue would swell so she couldn't breathe. No worries, she would just use an EPI pen to fix that. This time it didn't work. So she drove 45 mins drunk and on EPI to the detour. She was admitted to the hospital and dried out. These are the mild stories. Story 16, I worked at Bullfrog Spas, a hot tub manufacturer, for a short period some years ago, and they employed good behavior prisoners because the prison was next door to the factory. There were a few guards around at all times, but we worked closely together and always got to know the inmates in our areas. Of course, people would ask them what they were in for. Variety of stuff such as failed hired hitman, robbery, etc. So probably them or my mother. To be honest though, they were super fun, cool to work with. Highly recommend it. They weren't allowed certain luxuries, but had water flasks, so sometimes on factory breaks I'd ask them if they wanted anything, candy/snack/soda, and put it in the flask for them to enjoy when out of sight of the guards walking around. They appreciated it quite a lot, haha. Story 17. Not as direct as many comments here, but I was briefly in business with a former high-ranking politician in my country. They weren't particularly malicious, but their arrogance and narcissism was matched only by their incompetence. It was terrifying that someone who I wouldn't trust to wipe their own ass used to play a significant role in running a G20 country. I know everyone thinks politicians are morons, but this was first-hand evidence of how f***ed we must all be. Story 18. I work with a doctor. He seems kind of dangerous. Story 19. Probably my best friend in high school, though he's more of a danger to himself than anyone else. Story 20. In the ADES, my father knew a family of brothers. They were well-connected people. The oldest didn't trust banks and only used cash, rolls of notes as thick as your wrist. As a kid, I got stuff for Christmas that fell off the back of a truck. New bikes, etc. If a car was stolen, it could easily be stripped for parts in hours. As one brother owned a scrapyard, my dad worked with them regularly and always got paid well, but never said too much about the work. Story 21. I got close with a person I met for an online hookup. After 6 months, he opens up to me about how he has multiple murderous thoughts, and he's in therapy for it. Told me how he used poisons in very creative ways on his bullies and got them extremely sick. I thanked him for opening up to me, then slowly got too busy to hang out anymore. Story 22 years ago, I would have said a guy I knew who was kind of like a low-level crime boss of sorts. That was until he was killed. Nowadays, I'd probably say a bodybuilder I know who also does some amateur MMA stuff. Years ago, a student club I was in would frequent a kebab restaurant. The waiter there would give newcomers free soup and sometimes free samples. And it worked. We liked the taste and occasional freebies. One day, a friend asked him if it doesn't cost much, and he replied, "Dude, we lost 8 million S in one night once. They burned our hotel down and killed some of our men. Believe me, $20 means nothing in comparison." And his delivery was pretty serious. A year or so later, he was fired by the new owners, who didn't like him giving away free stuff, which was a mistake, Amo, because Afayik, he earned many regulars there. Story 23. Me, I single-handedly have the power to completely upend my life at a moment's notice and run it into the ground. There isn't a single other person in the world that can do that. Story 24. My sister, she ruins people's lives for fun when she's bored. There doesn't need to be a reason. Story 25. Some dude a family member of mine knows. They were work colleagues for over 25 years. The dude is a black belt in karate and a few other martial arts. He has a lazy eye and F***D up ears from all of the fists his face ate. He lit his ex-house on fire over her being a bit petty in the divorce. Beat up a neighbor over a parking dispute, and when the neighbor called the cops, he set their car on fire. He used to sell drugs, but like in an organized, professional way. He didn't need anyone's help enforcing payment. He was his own enforcer. He was active in a truck drivers union and would routinely scare the shit out of union busters and nasty supervisors. He's the only one people were told to stay clear from. Bloke owns multiple large houses and cottages. Is over 60 years old. He still will, for about $200, deliver a pizza to someone for friends in need. That's code word for breaking someone's leg or if asterisking up their $200. He'll ring at people's place, holding a pizza for them to open up. When they do, he unleashes a world of pain and just leaves whatever message was ordered to be left. Bloke just likes fighting. He's also very good at it. Always evaded being pinned for anything he ever did. Wouldn't be surprised if he killed a man or two before. Fortunately for me, he's friendly to my family. Just don't owe him money.